Smithfield Market in Belfast is photographed in 1963. The market was one of the city's most beloved and chaotic trading spaces, a covered warren of stalls selling second-hand goods, antiques, and curiosities that had served the community for generations before being destroyed by fire in 1974. Willie Dixon and Bo Diddley are photographed together by David Horwitz. Dixon was one of the most influential songwriters and bassists in Chicago blues history, while Bo Diddley created one of rock and roll's most distinctive rhythmic signatures. Their combined influence on American popular music was enormous and lasting. If these pictures made you feel something, drop a comment below and let me know which story hit you the hardest. These people deserve to be remembered. A like and subscribe costs you nothing. Mademoiselle Gabrielle is depicted in a poster that the person sharing it describes as beautiful, noting her piercing gaze and the detailed work on her clothing. The image presents her as someone capable of commanding a crowd, preserved in a promotional format designed to draw public attention to her presence. Gloria Hendry, born March 3, 1949, is photographed in a promotional image for the James Bond film Live and Let Die in 1973. She played the role of Rosie Carver in the film, becoming one of the first black actresses to appear as a Bond girl in the franchise. Winston Churchill is photographed in London in September 1949, smoking a cigar shortly after returning from a holiday on the French Riviera. He is 74 years old in the photograph, 4 years removed from his wartime leadership and 2 years away from returning to power as Prime Minister. Mark Twain is photographed with his longtime friend John T. Lewis in New York in 1903. Lewis was a black farmer in Maryland who had saved the lives of members of Twain's family in 1877, an act that Twain never forgot and that formed the basis of a decades-long friendship. 3 more Insolnia MS-315 aircraft perform at an air show in Gironde, France in 1940, with a tiger moth also participating in the display. The show takes place during the same year France would fall to German invasion, making this a document of ordinary French life on the edge of catastrophe. The exterior of the library in Littleton, New Zealand, is photographed on the corner of Sumner Road and Oxford Street in the 1970s. The building served the port community of Littleton, a small town on the Banks Peninsula near Christchurch that was heavily damaged in the 2011 Canterbury earthquakes. President John F. Kennedy and Ivory Coast President Félix Houphouët-Boigny ride together in a bubble-top limousine on May 22, 1962. The visit was part of Kennedy's engagement with newly independent African nations as the United States and Soviet Union competed for influence across the African continent during the Cold War. A young Bill Clinton shakes hands with President John F. Kennedy in Washington, D.C. in 1963. Clinton was 16 years old and attending the program as a delegate from Arkansas. Kennedy would be assassinated later that year, and Clinton would himself become the 42nd President of the United States. The Volcano Cafe in Littleton, New Zealand, is photographed on October 11, 1988. The cafe was part of the social fabric of Littleton's small port community, a town known for its bohemian character and its position as the gateway to Canterbury and the Southern Alps beyond. Leslie Gore was born in New York City on May 2, 1946. At 16, she recorded It's My Party, which reached #1 in the United States in 1963. She followed it with 10 further Billboard Top 40 hits, including Judy's Turn to Cry and You Don't Own Me. The Fugs are photographed in front of band member Ed Sanders' Peace Eye bookstore, formerly a kosher butcher shop, on East 10th Street at Avenue A in Alphabet City, New York City in 1965. The members pictured are Ken Weaver, Ed Sanders, Tully Kupferberg, Peter Stampfel, and Steve Weber. William Casby, 106 years old, holds his great-great-granddaughter in a photograph taken by Richard Avedon in 1963. Born into slavery in Danville, Virginia, in 1857, he worked as a longshoreman after emancipation and lived to the age of 113, one of the longest-lived documented survivors of American slavery. The Post and Telegraph Office in Norwich Quay, Littleton, New Zealand, is photographed around 1885. The building served the communications needs of a port community that was one of the most important entry points for goods and passengers arriving in the Canterbury region of the South Island during that era. On April 30, 1900, Casey Jones died in a train wreck at Vaughan, Mississippi, while driving the Cannonball Express. He stayed at the controls to slow the train and save his passengers, dying on impact. His death was later immortalized in the widely known ballad. Mickey Hart and Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead are photographed backstage together in 1972. The band was in the middle of one of the most productive periods of their career, touring extensively and releasing some of their most celebrated live recordings during the early years of that decade. On May 2, 1826, Pedro I of Brazil resigned as King of Portugal in favor of his young daughter Maria. His uncle Miguel immediately challenged the succession, refusing to accept a child queen, and the resulting conflict escalated into the Liberal Wars, a civil war that lasted until 1834. Gay pride marches in New York City in 1982 carry signs supporting the Union Club, a gay bar. The march takes place at a time when the AIDS crisis was beginning to devastate the gay community, making the public assertion of identity and community visible in the photographs of that year particularly significant. People wait at a streetcar terminal in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, photographed by Russell Lee in 1939. Lee was one of the Farm Security Administration photographers documenting everyday American life during the Great Depression, and this image captures an ordinary moment of urban transit during one of the country's most difficult decades. A grandmother smiles proudly while posing with her granddaughter in Denmark in August 1894, captured on a glass negative. The photograph preserves a moment of intergenerational warmth in the precise and softly tonal quality that glass negative photography produced in the final decade of the 19th century. Two near life-size sculptures unearthed from an ancient Roman tomb in Pompei are photographed together. The figures were preserved by the volcanic material that buried the city in 79 AD, and their discovery adds to the extraordinary body of Roman art and everyday objects recovered from the Pompei excavations. Gordon Parks photographs an untitled scene in Fort Scott, Kansas, in 1950. Parks was one of America's most significant documentary photographers and the first African-American staff photographer at Life magazine, known for his deeply humanistic images of poverty, race, and everyday life across the United States. Buddy Guy performs during a 16-show residency at his namesake Buddy Guy's Legends Club in Chicago in 2023, photographed by Michael Lepek. Guy founded the club in 1989, and it has become one of the most celebrated blues venues in the United States over its more than 3 decades of operation. Swiss writer Anemarie Schwarzenbach is photographed at Helms Ferry on Norris Lake in Tennessee in 1936. Schwarzenbach was a Swiss journalist, photographer, and author who traveled extensively across the United States, Asia, and the Middle East during the 1930s, documenting her journeys through both writing and photography. A phone booth stands on 6th Avenue near Radio City Music Hall in New York City in the 1970s. The street-level payphone was a standard feature of the urban landscape in that era, offering the only means of making a public telephone call before mobile technology changed everything. Fred Stein photographs a man carrying bottles on a Paris street in 1938 in an image titled Homme avec des bouteilles. Stein was a German Jewish photographer who fled to Paris after Hitler came to power and documented French street life until the German occupation forced him to flee again in 1940. A person from the Castro neighborhood of San Francisco is photographed in the 1980s. The Castro was the center of San Francisco's gay community during a decade shaped by the AIDS crisis, and photographs from the neighborhood during this period carry the particular weight of a community under enormous pressure. A young job seeker waits outside an Italian-American employment agency in San Francisco in 1936 during the depths of the Great Depression. The image documents the particular experience of immigrant communities navigating unemployment during the worst economic crisis in American history, seeking work through ethnic community networks. A mother walks her daughter to Sunday school on a road between Memphis, Tennessee, and Clarksdale, Mississippi, in 1938. The two walked together along a rural road in the American South during the late years of the Great Depression, a small moment of ordinary life captured on a country road. Zara Larsson wears Versace Spring 2006 at the Billboard Women in Music ceremony in Los Angeles. The vintage Versace gown drew attention for its connection to the early 2000s fashion archive, part of a broader trend among performers and celebrities revisiting and restaging significant looks from past runway collections. Henry Jamin Brooks paints private view of the Old Masters exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1888, completing the canvas in 1889. The large group portrait documents the social world of late Victorian art exhibition culture, recording the faces of dozens of prominent figures in attendance at the prestigious annual event. Garland founded a polyamorous nature colony using his father's millions in 1918. He was an heir to a significant fortune who rejected conventional life and used his inheritance to fund experimental communal living arrangements and left-wing causes, becoming one of the more unusual American social experimenters of that era. Marshall Field's delivery wagons line Holden Court at the State Street store in Chicago in 1897. Before motor vehicles, the department store operated a delivery network of 700 horses and 400 wagons to serve its customers across the city, one of the largest private working horse fleets in the country. The only three known photographs of Taliban founder Mullah Omar are presented together. Omar was exceptionally reclusive, partly because of his distinctive appearance. He had only one eye and stood 6 feet 6 inches tall. He died in hiding in 2013, his death kept secret by the Taliban for 2 years. Boy sits in a toy wagon pulled by toy horses in an American photograph from the 1890s. He is posed carefully for the camera in the formal manner of childhood portrait photography from that era, surrounded by play objects that represent the domestic toy culture of late Victorian America. Michael Hill, the guitarist known as Alligator, is photographed in a promotional image by Paul LaRaya. Hill is a New York-based blues guitarist who has recorded for Alligator Records, one of the most significant independent blues labels in the United States since its founding in Chicago in 1971. Zuhair Murad's Spring 2020 couture collection draws inspiration from ancient Egyptian symbols and art. The designs incorporate motifs and aesthetic references drawn from one of the ancient world's most visually distinctive civilizations, placing pharaonic imagery within the contemporary framework of high fashion, runway presentation, and luxury couture craftsmanship. Duke Ellington was born in Washington, D.C. on April 29, 1899. He is known for It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, Cocktails for Two, and Take the A Train. He became one of the most celebrated and influential figures in the history of jazz music. St. Barnabas Cathedral in Nottingham features a chapel of Our Lady and was designed by Augustus Pugin in 1842, the same architect who helped design the Houses of Parliament. The Gothic Revival building remains one of the finest examples of Pugin's ecclesiastical work in the English Midlands. John Bonham and Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin are photographed together in 1970. The band was at the height of its early commercial success, having released 3 albums in less than 2 years. Bonham was widely regarded as one of the most powerful and influential rock drummers of his generation. Marilyn Monroe performs for approximately 100,000 American troops stationed in Korea in 1954. She made the tour during February of that year, performing on outdoor stages in freezing temperatures and later describing the experience as one of the most meaningful and memorable of her entire public life. Little Conchita Carmen Garcia gets her first taste of birthday cake in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on February 17, 1952, photographed on Kodak safety film. The image captures a familiar childhood milestone with the warmth of mid-century family photography at a moment of pure and uncomplicated delight. Casalluccio di Norcia is a small hilltop village in central Italy located in the Apennine Mountains of Umbria. It sits at over 1,400 meters elevation on the edge of the Piano Grande Plateau and was severely damaged by the 2016 Central Italy earthquake that devastated much of the surrounding region. St. Sebastian Church, known as Pfarrkirche St. Sebastian, stands in the village of Ramsau bei Berchtesgaden in Bavaria, Germany. The church is one of the most photographed in the Alps, its white facade and onion-domed tower set against a mountain backdrop that has made it an iconic image of rural Bavaria. Ken Osmond played Eddie Haskell on Leave It to Beaver, the 1957-1963 CBS sitcom. The character was known for his insincere politeness to adults and his bullying behavior toward Wally and Beaver, becoming one of American television comedy's most enduring portraits of adolescent two-facedness and social manipulation. Vojvoda Mišić and General Leblois stand together before Bitola in 1918. A Serbian commander and a French general photographed side by side in the final push of a campaign that had cost both their armies enormously just to reach this particular point together during the war's final year. A dinner dress made of black silk velvet with black chantilly lace embroidered with jet beads and sequins, with a pale pink organdy bodice lining and pink cotton sleeve lining, is photographed as a preserved garment from the 1890s to 1900s. It represents the elaborate formal evening wear of that era. A soldier sleeps hurriedly on the front lines, snatching rest wherever and whenever it becomes briefly possible during an active military deployment. The image captures the exhaustion that defines life on the front, where the body demands sleep even when the surrounding circumstances offer almost no safe space for it. Eve Plum, best known for playing Jan Brady on The Brady Bunch, is photographed on a Portuguese beach. The image shows the actress in an informal setting, away from the American television production that made her famous, relaxing somewhere along the Portuguese coastline in a candid vacation photograph. Giancarlo Giannini is photographed in Bisceglie in the 1970s. The Italian actor was one of the most celebrated European film performers of that decade, widely recognized for his collaborations with director Lina Wertmuller in films including Swept Away and Seven Beauties, which earned him an Academy Award nomination in 1977. An African-American man registers to vote in Haywood County, Tennessee, in 1960, while three men watch the line. Voter registration drives in the American South during this period were frequently met with intimidation and violence, making each act of registration a significant and sometimes dangerous assertion of civil rights. Workers operate an assembly line at the Carl Zeiss optical factory in Jena, East Germany, in the 1950s. The Zeiss factory continued producing precision optical instruments after the division of Germany, operating under state ownership in the German Democratic Republic throughout the post-war decades of the Cold War period. Margaret Corbin was an American Revolutionary War heroine who took over her wounded husband's cannon during the Battle of Fort Washington in 1776 and continued firing until she was severely wounded. She was the first woman to receive a pension from the United States government for her military service. Mexican farm workers eat lunch together in Stockton, California, in 1943. They are part of the large agricultural labor force that worked California's Central Valley during the war years, continuing the harvest of crops that were critical to the war effort while many American-born workers were serving in the military. The baptistry of St. John in Pisa, where Galileo was baptized in 1564, stands alongside the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Assumption on the Piazza dei Miracoli. The complex, including the famous Leaning Tower, represents one of the finest concentrations of Romanesque architecture in the world. Soviet forces raised their flag over the Reichstag in Berlin on April 30, 1945. The moment was photographed and became one of the most iconic images of the Second World War, symbolizing the final defeat of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union's decisive role in the victory over the Third Reich. The Maple, also known as the Strides, was a playground fixture photographed in 1975. Children would hold the attached ropes or handles and spin around the central pole, a form of simple mechanical playground equipment that was common in school playgrounds and public parks across Britain and America during that era. Igreja Paroquial de Nossa Senhora de Conceição stands in Porto, Portugal. The parish church dedicated to Our Lady of the Conception is one of the city's significant religious buildings. reflecting the deep Catholic architectural tradition that shaped the urban landscape of Porto across several centuries of continuous construction and renovation. Spectators watch a surfing contest at Huntington Beach, California, in 1962. The beach had established itself as one of the centers of Southern California surf culture by this time, and competitive surfing events were drawing growing crowds during the early years of the sport's rise toward mainstream cultural recognition. Students at Augustana College react to the not guilty verdict in the O.J. Simpson murder trial on October 3, 1995. The verdict divided the country sharply along racial lines and produced some of the most intense and widely discussed public reactions to a criminal verdict in American history. An Asian young man buys his first car after officially becoming an American citizen in 1981. The purchase is photographed as a personal milestone, combining two significant life events, capturing a moment that for many immigrants represented the fulfillment of the material and civic aspirations that motivated their journey to America. Chilean President Salvador Allende stands rifle in hand and wearing a helmet during the military coup attack on La Monda Palace in Santiago on September 11, 1973. He died inside the palace that day as General Augusto Pinochet's forces overthrew his democratically elected government with American backing. A 3,000-year-old Egyptian statue head of a woman from the New Kingdom period is carved from limestone and held at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. The piece dates to a period when Egypt was at the height of its imperial power under the pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Mickey Mantle hits his first major league home run at Comiskey Park in Chicago on May 1, 1951, during his rookie season with the New York Yankees. The hit marked the beginning of a home run career that would eventually total 536, making him one of the most celebrated sluggers in baseball history. Peter Beard photographs himself writing in his journal in Kenya in 1965. Beard was an American photographer, writer, and artist known for his documentation of African wildlife and landscape, and his journals, which combined photographs, drawings, and text, became art objects in their own right alongside his photographic work. The Baroque staircase of the Zwinge Palace in Dresden, Germany, is photographed inside one of the finest examples of German Baroque architecture. The palace was commissioned by Augustus the Strong in the early 18th century, largely destroyed in the 1945 Allied bombing of Dresden, and subsequently rebuilt over several decades. Arthur Brown of the Crazy World of Arthur Brown is photographed in 1968 by David Montgomery. Brown was known for his theatrical and fire-based stage performances and for the 1968 hit Fire, which reached #1 in the United Kingdom and became one of the most recognizable singles of that year. Man Ray's Noir et Blanche is published on May 1, 1926. The photograph, showing Kiki de Montparnasse holding an African mask, became one of the most iconic images of the Surrealist movement and one of the most reproduced photographs in the history of 20th century avant-garde art and photography. President Franklin D. Roosevelt gazes at a large globe gifted to him by the staff of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor organization to the CIA, in 1942. The globe was presented during the Second World War as a symbol of the global reach of American wartime intelligence operations. Young men hang out by their cars in 1980s American suburbia. The image captures the particular culture of suburban youth during that decade, when the car functioned as both a social space and a symbol of identity, the parking lot and the street serving as the primary gathering places. 3 New York boxers are photographed in 1911. Louis de Ponthieu stood 5 feet 4 inches and was a champion. Carl Morris stood 6 feet 4 inches and was known as the Oklahoma Giant. Leech Cross was known as the Fighting Dentist because of the day job he maintained alongside his boxing career. Theodore Bikel was born in Vienna, Austria, on May 2, 1924. He was an actor, folk singer, and political activist who co-founded the Newport Folk Festival in 1959 and originated the role of Captain Von Trapp in the original Broadway production of The Sound of Music that same year. Brown of Harvard, a silent film featuring John Wayne in his film debut at the age of 18, is released on May 2, 1926. The film was one of the earliest screen appearances by Wayne before he became one of the most commercially successful actors in the history of Hollywood. Bathing Beauty poses in the snow at Coney Island in 1969. The combination of a swimsuit and winter weather at the famous Brooklyn beach creates a deliberately absurd image, the kind of playful visual contrast that photographers and subjects at Coney Island had been staging for decades by that point. Long John Hunter, Lonnie Brooks, and Philip Walker are photographed together by Wyatt McSpadden. All three were significant figures in American blues music, each with a career built in different regional traditions of the genre, brought together in a photograph that documents a moment of connection between distinctive musical voices. Anthony Perkins and Jane Fonda are photographed together on the set of Tall Story in 1960. The film was Fonda's screen debut and one of Perkins' lighter roles before he became permanently associated with his iconic performance as Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, released the same year. Three Catholic priests are photographed during a visit to Vatican City around 1955. They stand together in the city-state that serves as the headquarters of the Catholic Church, visiting the site during a decade when the papacy of Pius XII was nearing its end and the Second Vatican Council was still years away. Otis Rush was born in Philadelphia, Mississippi, on April 29, 1934. He was a blues singer and guitarist, recognized as one of the originators of the Chicago blues sound, known for his distinctive left-handed guitar style and his influence on generations of blues and rock musicians who followed him. Men eat herring in the traditional Dutch way in Rotterdam, Netherlands, in 1937. The practice of eating raw salted herring by holding the fish by the tail and lowering it into the mouth is a long-standing Dutch tradition, particularly associated with the annual arrival of new herring in early summer. The apse of the Abbey Church of the Royal Abbey of Fontevraud in Maine-et-Loire, France, is photographed showing its Romanesque style. The abbey, founded in 1101, is one of the largest monastic complexes in Europe and Sea. Contains the tombs of several Plantagenet kings and queens, including Henry II and Elena of Aquitaine. Italian immigrants lay new trolley tracks in an American city around 1920. Italian laborers were among the most significant contributors to American infrastructure construction during the early 20th century, working on railroads, roads, tunnels, and urban transit systems across the country during the peak decades of Italian immigration. Moroccan worshippers make their way to pray at a local mosque in the 1980s. The image documents everyday Islamic religious practice in Morocco, where attendance at mosque for the 5 daily prayers remains a central feature of community life in both urban and rural settings across the country. Family is photographed in Key West in the early 1970s, including the maternal grandparents of the person who shared the image and their mother and aunt, who are 15 months apart in age. The person sharing the photograph notes they are expecting a second daughter who will also be 15 months apart from her older sister. Wedding guests and a bridesmaid pose before a wedding ceremony in the 1960s, photographed on Kodachrome film. The group stands arranged for the camera in their formal attire, capturing the particular color saturation and warmth that Kodachrome produced in the photographs of that decade's social events and celebrations. Barack Obama accepts the Democratic presidential nomination at the final day of the 2008 Democratic National Convention. The event was held at Invesco Field in Denver, Colorado, with an audience of approximately 80,000 people, marking the first time an African American had accepted a major party's presidential nomination. Comparison illustrates the enormous size difference between the treasure ships of Chinese Admiral Zheng He and the vessels sailed by Christopher Columbus in the 15th century. Zheng He's largest ships were reportedly several times longer than Columbus's Santa Maria, reflecting the vast gap in naval scale between Ming China and European exploration. A young barber works on an elderly client in Italy in 1955. The image captures an intimate moment of the barbershop as a social space in post-war Italian life. The young man practicing his craft on an older customer in the close and unhurried setting of a small Italian barbershop. A young Bill Clinton shakes hands with President John F. Kennedy in Washington, D.C. in 1963. Clinton was 16 years old, attending a program as an Arkansas delegate. Kennedy would be assassinated later that year, and Clinton would himself become the 42nd President of the United States in 1993. Kaya Dullier and Janet Margolin visit a New York theater showing their film David and Lisa, which had set box office records, as reported in the March 16, 1963 issue of the Saturday Evening Post. The low-budget independent film about two mentally ill teenagers received wide critical acclaim on its release.